Oliveira Lawyers. We are starting one more live stream. Today is Sunday, August the 10th, and now it's 3:31 Rio de Janeiro time, and we are just getting started. I see we have a couple of likes already. Thank you very much. We're just getting started with 2 likes. And remember, as a participant in our live stream, you can suggest topics of your interest. It doesn't need to be just legal stuff. We are happy to discuss any aspect of Brazil and Portugal that you want. And let's get started with news. Let's take a look at Estadão. Estadão is the newspaper that we are checking out nowadays. Estadão is a 150 years old newspaper. They are more like center oriented. They are not like right wing. They are not left wing. They are kind of well balanced. So we're gonna pick this newspaper because the prior one was more oriented to one side, and this one, is more like well balanced. So that's why we're picking Estadão nowadays instead of UOL. And just as usual, guess what? Like the main headlines are gonna be addressing the United States, right? Actually, here the first one is addressing President Lula's efforts, to secure a more competitive position in the next presidential election. So he's trying to bring new stuff, particularly for the median class and also like the poorest areas of Brazil in order to improve his competitivity. Right now he's not really very competitive. He did win the last election by something like half or 1% advantage over the second place, which was former President Bolsonaro. And so this is the main headline, but right after that, you can see is pretty much everything about the United States, right? So the first one is discussing about the relationship between Brazil and the United States over the years. Then there is a headline here about the economies saying that President Trump's tariffs on Brazilian goods are not that bad. There is another one saying that like people in Brazil, they are trying to keep Brazil as a hostage to the United States. And then there is another one saying that the vice secretary of President Trump is saying that Moraes, or Alexandre de Moraes, which is nowadays the leading and super activist justice of the Brazilian Supreme Court, has destroyed the relationship between the United States and Brazil. And now we have no way out of this mess, right? So you see here, that's why I like Estadão. They show different perspectives, right? And in just these few headlines, you see people who are clearly in favor of the right side of the aisle and people who are in favor of the left side of the aisle. So Estadão, they try to keep this thing more well-balanced, and that's why we're going to be sharing news from Estadão from now on. Also, I think this headline here is super interesting, and this is like a kind of famous Brazilian economist. His name is Marcos Lisboa. And Marcos here, Lisboa, is saying that basically the United States are copying Brazil in terms of how to use the tariffs, and he's complimenting it's unbelievable, right? And to a certain extent, like he's right, because as I did mention, like in a few live streams, like Brazil is pretty big on tariffs since forever, all right? So just another perspective, up to the 90s, until the 90s, Brazil was actually, from the economy's perspective, a kind of North Korea. So you wouldn't be able to bring any imports into Brazil, no matter how much you would pay in tariffs. So I'm not really joking. You could say, listen, I'm going to pay 500% in tariffs. Can I bring this product into Brazil? And the rule was no, you cannot bring anything to Brazil other than components. So Brazil is going to be self-sufficient in terms of, agriculture. And we also needed to be self-sufficient in terms of computers, machinery, and pretty much everything, right? Like, the automotive industry. So that was the idea up to I think it was 92 at least. And I remember when I was a teenager, I used to travel to Paraguay, which is a neighboring country, to buy stuff that I could not buy in Brazil. So if you would travel abroad, you could actually bring a small quota, something like a couple of $100 in imports. So, that was the only way that we could have access to anything that would be, like electronics, video games, spirits. You need to travel abroad. Otherwise, you would be restricted to only Brazilian goods. And then starting in the 90s, Brazil was opening up in exchange for tariffs. And since the 90s up to today, up to nowadays, we have, high tariffs no matter what you're bringing into the country, okay? And just to give an example, if you're going to import a car, from the United States, you're going to pay roughly between 100 to 120% in tariffs nowadays, as of today. And look at that. You're not going to be able to bring every type of car, only new cars and cars older than 30 years. So very often in our consultations, we're going to hear something like this. Listen, can I take my Harley Davidson, to Brazil? Because, prices for motorcycles in Brazil, or cars for that matter, they are crazily expensive. And I just want to take my car there because even with all the transportation costs, I feel like I'm still going to be, in a better place than buying out of Brazil, right? And then, unfortunately, the answer is going to be no, you cannot bring, your used Harley Davidson or your car, because there is a blanket prohibition for people to import used cars to Brazil, because our industry is so inefficient that if you allow people to bring used cars to Brazil, even if you charge 100% tariff, you're still going to hurt the local manufacturers, right? So here, Marcos Lisboa is saying, what, like the United States is now following Brazil in terms of presenting tariffs for people to send stuff to the United States, meaning there is a certain barrier to allow certain industries to develop in the United States. And I'm not going to address here if I think the idea is good or not. I'm just addressing some headlines that I thought to be very interesting to share with you guys. Let's take a look and see if we have any topics of interest so far. It looks like we have one. Jonathan McMillan. Jonathan, I think it has been a while. How you doing, Jonathan? Hello, Luciano. Jonathan from the Illinois, USA. Yeah, Jonathan, I do remember you. It has been a while. How you doing? Are you coming to Brazil? Are you spending, quality time in Brazil? How is your family? And good to see you here, Jonathan. Jonathan is sharing or asking, does the exchange rate of the dollar for real ease the cost of a vehicle electronics, right? Of a vehicle electronics. So the exchange rate of the dollar for the real is the cost of electronics, right? So I mean, I believe you're probably saying, listen, I'm gonna be buying with U.S. dollars and I have a higher, acquisition power. Is this gonna, make my life easier? And that's a great point, Jonathan. So yes, this is gonna probably, mitigate the inefficiency of our, manufacturers in Brazil. And because you have, like you earn, you get your salary or, your pension or whatever source income you have in US dollars, typically you're gonna be in a much better position than a local Brazilian. Really nice point, Jonathan, for sure. Yes, if you earn in US dollars, in terms of the conversion, exchange into Brazilian reais, typically things are gonna feel much cheaper than they would to a Brazilian national. All right, Jonathan, really nice point. Rony Dio, boa tarde, Rony. Good to see you over here. And we are just getting started. Let me know if you have any other topics of interest. We have Bill. Good to see you, Bill. Oi, Luciano. In your opinion, what is the best time to visit Rio and all the beaches around? For first time, would not like to come for New Year's or Carnival. Hi, Ronnie and Jonathan. Welcome, Bill. And that's a good point. So, like you are asking for the best time. And just like you well said, like typically New Year's Eve and Carnival, they are going to be like the peak season for Rio de Janeiro, meaning that there's going to be a huge number of people everywhere. Prices are going to be crazily expensive. So yes, I would recommend, for a first a visit to Rio to avoid those peak times, just because, again, everything is going to be crazily expensive. And also the infrastructure is going to be strained, right? So, for instance, New Year's Eve, like if you go to Copacabana, right? Like I've been there, and it's just like millions of people in a single location, right? Like, the thing is overwhelming. You don't have access to, like a restroom. You are unable to safely use like a cell phone, right? Like, there are pickpockets naturally, right? Given the sheer number of people. So yes, I like your idea of avoiding those dates. And if you are trying to, get the best deal possible, Bill, I would say that, like typically, like between May and the beginning of June, it's going to be, a good period, because then it's going to be outside of the carnival. It's going to be before vacation time for Europeans and U.S. citizens, and the temperatures are still going to be nice. Right now, like when you get like to June or like late August, it starts to get cold. Even in Rio de Janeiro, right? Like temperatures could drop like to the 60s, sometimes even in the 50s, right? So if you travel like after Carnival and before June or before July at least, you're gonna enjoy really nice temperatures, and you're gonna have more of Rio de Janeiro for yourself. Yes, that would be my recommendation. Now, listen, this is pretty personal, right? Like I know some people who are going to say, listen, the only reason why I want to go to Rio de Janeiro is to experience the carnival craziness, right? Or other people who are going to say, well, it's just like in New York City and, dropping the ball. You got to experience Copacabana at least once in your lifetime, right? So different people, different takes or different values, but for your circumstances, Bill, I would say, right after Carnival and before, the middle of the year vacation time for Europeans and U.S. citizens. I hope that makes sense. Jonathan, yes, it has been a while. Thanks. It's good to listen to your expertise and wisdom on these matters. All right, Jonathan. Again, always good to see you around. Yokora, olá Luciano, bom te ver, watching from Santo Antonio, Texas. Yokora, good to know. Have you been enjoying Brazil? I understand you're back to San Antonio, and I've been to San Antonio a couple of times. Like I went to the, to those restaurants and bars like around the river, right? Yokora, like, could you remind me what's the name of the river? It's so. Nice, that area, right? Like, I think you go downstairs because like the streets in San Antonio, they are substantially higher than the river level, and then you have a river that kind of crosses the city, and throughout the margins you're gonna find a really nice restaurants and bars. So that's what I remember from San Antonio, and I surely had a blast. This couple of times I went to San Antonio. All right. Jonathan, Luciano, I've been tracking homes outside of São Paulo since March 2024, and they're still listed for sale at the same price. Is there a substantial discount or deal to be made on these properties? Jonathan, like in theory, there should be, right? Because, if people are in the market, they are trying to sell their properties and they are not selling, common sense says that they should, right? Now, we have a cultural component here, Jonathan, which goes like this. Like when they know that there is a foreign citizen interested in buying the property, is not rare when they actually try to jack up the prices, right? Unfortunately, maybe a little bit of the Brazilian culture, like they say, well, here comes a gringo, like full of money, right? He's not a Brazilian. Like we Brazilians, we need to resort to a finance, other types of tools to be able to buy a property. That's typically the case for the vast majority of Brazilians, and then they see like a U.S. citizen coming with a strong currency, and not only a strong currency but a stronger economy, no matter what, always much better than the Brazilian one. So there is this kind of cultural trait of, unfortunately, take advantage of the next person, right? And that's not only targeting U.S. citizens, but even among Brazilians. That's unfortunately something that's going to happen sometimes, right? But again, like once they see a gringo, right, like a U.S. citizen coming with a strong currency, it's very difficult for them to say, well, I need to sell. I'm going to give, a sharp discount because I do need to sell this thing. The first thought is going to be, well, now I'm hitting jackpot because here it comes the gringo. I'm actually going to increase my price in 10%, despite the fact that they haven't been able to sell the property for a long time. So just, sharing. Now, this is not like, of course, written in stone. This is not set in stone, Jonathan. And some people, they're going to be, I would say they're going to have a better ethics than others. And it could be very well possible that you would secure something like a 10% price reduction, particularly, just like you said, if this property has been sitting in the market for a while. In terms of negotiating prices, the only thing that is going to actually move a Brazilian to drop the price is typically when they see you walking away, all right? And it is very surprising to me. It does not matter the type of client. We have in the United States, either, someone from the military, someone who's a lawyer, someone who's a business person, someone who's, I don't know, a professor at MIT, and time after time, they cannot help themselves, and they just rush into the negotiation. They offer a price the person doesn't take. They don't wait a few days to make another offer. It's just like they cannot help themselves. And again, the only thing that you can do to maximize your chances of getting the best price possible is to walk away. And what do I mean by walk away? I mean, walk away, just go check other properties, give you some radio silence, ignore the realtor who's going to be chasing you like a madman. Just go elsewhere. And then a couple of weeks down the line, maybe you could say, what about that offer that I made, 10% off? Like, is the seller now amenable to take my offer? Maybe not. And then guess what? You can still, give a new radio silence and see if that's going to work or not. And if it doesn't work, like you're going to have many other properties, to take a shot at. So, that's my recommendation. Don't get attached to a property early on, and consider your options. There is always a better property down the line. Don't rush yourself, and don't let you be played by locals. All right, that's my recommendation, Jonathan. I hope that was helpful. All right, Yokota. Yes, the River Walk. That's the name. All right, River Walk. Yeah, now I remember, Yokota. I hope you're enjoying the River Walk. If not today, one of these days. Vanessa. Hi, Vanessa. Do foreigners have access to financing while buying properties if they have a permanent residency? Vanessa, yes, like when you secure a permanent residency, everybody is going to see you more as a local than a foreign citizen, right? And then typically the other component that you may be missing, or the two components, better saying, one is going to be the length of your credit history. So even if you are a resident, right, like I assume that you are still building your credit in Brazil. Remember, you cannot basically just say, well, my credit in the US is like 750, 775. Whatever you have as a credit in the US or Europe or anywhere else, it doesn't automatically translate as the same credit score in Brazil. You need to build your credit, right? So this is another component that you're going to be missing, at least for the short term. And then the third one is going to be verified or verifiable income, because if you think about it, like Brazilian banks, they cannot tell if the income paperwork that you're presenting from another country is legitimate or not. So on this front, something that you can do, let's say if you're coming to Brazil under the digital nomad visa, right? And if you stay in Brazil after 283 days, guess what? You're going to be a tax resident. And then once you file your tax return in Brazil, and your tax return in Brazil shows the type of income you have abroad, in theory, you could use like in the year after your Brazilian tax return as a proof of income, right? Because again, if you show your W-2, your 1099, whatever you get, proving your income is going to be meaningless to the vast majority of banks in Brazil. Now, if you're filing a tax return in Brazil showing a large income abroad, and guess what? Potentially paying taxes on it, the banks are going to know that that income is most probably true, and then they would rely on your declared income in your Brazilian tax return to solve the missing income component. All right, Vanessa. So that's more or less your journey in terms of securing finance in Brazil. If you want to investigate one bank down the line, I typically recommend you to check out Santander, right? Like Santander is huge in Brazil, and they are doing pretty well in the mortgage market, in the finance market in Brazil. Sometimes they may even consider something. Let's say if you have a bank account in your country of residency, the United States or, Spain or, Portugal or the UK, potentially they could use your history as another factor, another component in their, mortgage analysis. All right, Vanessa. All right. Bill telling Jonathan, not far from you, I'm in Detroit, Michigan. There you go, guys. Yokota. All right. Let me see what else. Yokota, we'll be in Rio for years. Our hotel is near Praia de Botafogo. Is that a safe area to stay? That's a great choice. Botafogo is not the same type of feel of Copacabana, but it's still like beachfront. It's a really nice beach, a really nice neighborhood, Yokota. And guess what? You're gonna be able to watch the fireworks. There will be a lot of people in the beach, even in Botafogo, but I guarantee is nothing like the craziness that you would see in Copacabana, right? So Botafogo, Yokota, it actually sounds like a very good choice of place. Congratulations on your plan. All right, Aaron, in Canada, we buy things through numbered companies. If we want to hide our identity, could you help do something similar here? Aaron, let me see if I understand. Buy things through numbered companies. Well, I'm not sure if I follow exactly what you're planning, but if it is for the sake of protecting, your assets, Aaron, like we also have like the equivalent to LLCs in Brazil, and something that we do very often here at the firm is like if you bring an LLC from abroad, we can get this LLC and get enough paperwork for this foreign LLC to buy properties in Brazil, right? So we do have some investors, like they don't want to, participate in their personal capacities buying property in Brazil. So what we do is say, listen, you go out there, work with your CPA, get an LLC set up just for the purpose of acquiring your assets in Brazil. Once this LLC is ready, we're going to do the paperwork. So this LLC is going to receive a Brazilian tax ID. It's not going to be the CPF. It's going to be a different version that's called the CNPJ. And then with the CNPJ and other registrations, right? It's not just the CNPJ, not just the tax ID. There are a bunch of other registrations. This foreign LLC could actually be the owner of your properties in Brazil, and therefore, keeping your privacy and potentially, hiding your identity, right? That's more, not to like, in our understanding, that's more like to protect you from, frivolous lawsuits, not like for money laundering purposes. And by the way, very typically Brazil is going to want to know who's the, and just like in the United States, right, there is a push in the United States for that to happen. But in Brazil, for those registrations to occur, you need to inform who's going to be the final beneficiary of the entity, right? So, like you protect yourself, but it's not like a complete like black box, if you will, right? Like, I mean, at the end of the day, if the government still knows like who is the final beneficiary for the entity. Of course, like you could have another entity as the final beneficiary. It's also a matter of, planning. You could have a trust controlling the LLC. There are many strategies for that purpose. Aaron, Forza Milan, good to see you, Forza. Hello, Luciano, how are you? Are there any updates, official legislation in Brazil for citizens from CPLP countries who would need to stay 1 year in Brazil for citizenship? Forza, I don't think there is such a thing, right? Like, I mean, nowadays there is the paperwork, there is the what we call, I'm going to try to translate it, like a permission to reside in Brazil, and that's available to every country from the CPLP treaty. But the 1 year thing, as far as I know, it's not available even to Portuguese, right? Like, because in Brazil, we actually have two standards for. So we have one standard for, Portuguese people, meaning people who are coming from Portugal. And then we have another standard that's going to be for people coming, for instance, from Angola, right? So one standard for Portugal, a second standard for other countries from the CPLP treaty. But as far as I know, there is no such a thing as a 1 year track. And to be honest with you, I don't think there will ever be a Forza, because like the trend is just the opposite, right? Like if you pay attention to, immigration news, Portugal now is changing, like from 5 years. Like the first proposal was to make 10 years instead of 5 years for someone to secure citizenship, and nowadays, like there is a kind of compromise between the legislative in Portugal. They're trying to reach something like 7 years instead of 10. Okay, so in Brazil there is no such a thing as 1 year for a CPLP to secure a citizenship, and I'm pretty sure there will not be something like this. All right, Forza. I'm sorry to share, this perspective, but it's just like a global trend, right? Like if you look at the United States, if you look at Europe, and pretty much everywhere, people are trying to control the inflow of immigrants, if you will. Jonathan, thank you, Jonathan, for participating with interesting points. William Frost, hi Luciano, hi William, good to see you. How it's all going? Thank you very much for the live stream and for the free information you are providing. It's really good of you. Thank you so much. I appreciate the kind words, William, and I'm very happy to see you over here. All right. Yokota, typo, I meant we'll be there for New Year's. Yes, I understood, Yokota. That's a great plan. You're going to have a blast for sure. Jonathan McMillan, is there any new 2025 requirements to come into Brazil besides my passport as I used it in 2024? Yes, Jonathan, there is one. So since April the 10th, now you need a visa to enter Brazil. The good news is that most people are, qualifying for the so-called e-visa. So if you get an e-visa, that's something you can apply online. You don't necessarily need to go to a consulate. Yes, some people you need to go in person to a consulate, but this is more like on an exception basis. Most people are going to qualify for the e-visa, and the e-visa, I think the fee is still $80.90. The interesting fact about this number is like $80 will go to Brazil, and 90 cents will go to VFS. VFS is a private entity hired by Brazil, Portugal, and so many other countries to handle their more basic visa applications, right? So with VFS, they kind of provide like the infrastructure, the backbone for you to upload the pictures, documents, and so on, and then they are going to prepare a dossier for a Brazilian consulate to actually review the paperwork online, and then authorize the issuance of the Brazilian e-visa. All right, Jonathan. So yes, that's now a need, and before up to again April the 9th of 2025, you wouldn't need any visas at all. You would just come to Brazil as you wish. Now, there was something that President Lula was fighting ferociously since winning the election. And here I'm going to say something, is not like political oriented, but the, President Lula's party has been like, a party of people who hate the United States since forever, right? And so he was, actually just waiting for an opportunity to start to raise those barriers, like for U.S. citizens, right? Like, I mean, and his like explanation is also, has some merit on the other side. And he says, listen, Brazilians need to go through many hoops, to get a visa to the United States, and it's only fair that we do ask for something in exchange, the said $80, right? But like the discourse behind President Lula's actions, they are always seeking, I'm not sure to harm the United States per se, but to always try to kind of have a more balanced a more balanced relationship between the countries, right? And Brazil is one of the largest economies in the world. Nowadays, we are probably like the 10th or the 11th, right? So a pretty big economy we are. But still, whenever we are dealing with the United States, there is such a unbalanced relationship. So maybe, instead of saying that President Lula hates like the United States, President Lula has always thought that the United States should not be as dominant as the United States are, if you will. Okay, so there you go. So the e-visa was just the beginning, and nowadays we do have like a more open dispute going on between Brazil and the United States, as most of you probably know. All right, Forza, thanks for your content on YouTube and informative details. You're welcome, Forza, and always good to see you over here. William Frost, so tariffs, the elephant in the room. I know how you like talking politics in Texas. Yes, I mean, tariffs, for those of you who don't know, William is talking about the elephant in the room. So there is a very aggressive dispute between Brazil and the United States. The United States is applying a 50% tariff on many, Brazilian assets. And the interesting point over here is that it's not just about, economy, but it's also about politics, because President Trump said that one of the reasons for applying a 50% tariff against Brazil was for all the damage that the Brazilian Supreme Court is causing, to social media such as, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, and many others, right? And the point here, or President Trump's explanation, is that the Brazilian Supreme Court, and more specifically one justice, right? So it's not like all the justices, it's basically one justice, whose name is Alexandre de Moraes. He's issuing orders for social media based in the United States to take out accounts by U.S. permanent residents who happen to be Brazilians as well. And if they don't do so, guess what? The Brazilian Supreme Court is going to penalize those social media companies in the millions of dollars, right? The penalties, they are, pretty expressive. And given the large number of accounts that are being targeted by the Brazilian Supreme Court, not only President Trump, but a bunch of other, persons involved with social media, even Elon Musk, they have been very vocal about, what they believe it should be something that is hurting, the First Amendment, right? Maybe just to give you some more facts, many people in Brazil, if they criticize the Brazilian Supreme Court, if they criticize, President Lula, if they criticize the left side of the aisle, very often they are going to have their social media accounts taken away without due process, right? I think I can tell you as much as that without getting myself in trouble, believe it or not. So that's as far as I will go, William, but just sharing some highlights about the whole, dispute going on between Brazil and the United States. Adabi Tony, happy Sunday, sir. Happy Sunday to you as well, Adabi. Is it possible to register business in Brazil from overseas? Adabi, yes, it is, and it's actually easy to do so as long as you have a Brazilian resident, a Brazilian permanent resident, at least acting as your representative, right? So Brazil does not allow for people from abroad to basically just come to Brazil, even if they come physically and start a business. And the reasoning here is very typical of the Brazilian mentality, but we think, you know what, people are going to come here, and they are probably going to incur taxes. They are gonna, use labor, local labor, and they are not gonna pay the employees, and they are gonna run away back to their countries. And therefore, we're not gonna let that happen. And therefore, you cannot have a business in Brazil without someone on the hook for taxes and employment obligations, right? Like that's the whole point. And therefore, even if you have something like the digital nomad visa / residency, or you have the retirement visa, you are living as a legal resident in Brazil, and you still cannot be the legal representative for this entity, because the concern remains from the Brazilian government's perspective that you're going to run away and not pay your obligations. And therefore, they say, yeah, you can run your business, you can own 100% of the shares as long as I see someone on the hook for the obligations that I think it should be taken care no matter what. All right. And another concern, Adabi, and that's why typically you're going to hear me saying that we don't handle, the Brazilian investment visa in a company, is just because there are so many challenges in our country that I just don't think it's a good deal for someone to mix up immigration and business. Now, if you are a business person and you're going to be starting a business in Brazil because you are a business person and not because you want to secure residency, then this is a different story. It could make more sense, particularly if you're coming from a developing country. Because if you're coming from a developing country in Asia, in Africa, right, in certain areas of Europe, like you're so used to red tape and challenges and changes in economic policies and like problems with currency exchange, that Brazil is not going to be that different to you. Now, whenever I have someone coming from the United States, I'm always worried, because I say, listen, this folk, he can open a company in 2 hours, right? Like, in the United States, it has been typical for you to be able a company in 2 hours. If you're going to do by yourself, on a more slowed pace, maybe it's going to take you a few days to open the entity. And if you're coming to Brazil as a foreign citizen, it's not rare for you to take up to 6 months to have a company up and running, right? So it's just like such a distance between business in the United States and business in Brazil that I just think is a bad idea for people coming from, either the United States, Canada, developed nations in Europe, and start a business in Brazil for the sake of securing immigration benefits, that we basically don't do that here at the firm, right? There are other firms that they don't care. They say, listen, just pay my fee. I get you all set. And if it doesn't work, that's your problem. I don't like that mentality, because, if your company falls down the line, guess what? You're going to say, well, why didn't they tell me it was this hell, right? So my point here is that I don't want you to be in that position. Again, talking about citizens from developing countries. If you're coming, Adabi, from a developing country, again, what you're going to face in Brazil is probably not the difference from what you are already facing in your country of residency. I hope that makes sense. All right, William, it is the case that the tariffs on Brazil, 50%, are negotiable, and that the tariffs from the U.S. are because of tariffs that exist in Brazil already. Import taxes in Brazil are high, right? Exactly, William. Absolutely. I'm not sure if you were at the beginning of our live stream, but I was mentioning that if you want to bring a car from the United States, right? The availability of like special trims or models of cars in Brazil, they're very a little, right? Like we don't have like all the options that you would have in the United States. And if you want to import something from the United States or another country for that matter, you're going to pay over 100% in tariffs, over 100%, right? So, and through the industries, you're also going to see very meaningful tariffs, right? Like, if you're bringing whiskey, if you're bringing, spirits, it's probably going to be 80%. if you're importing, a bunch of other stuff. I don't think we are charging 10% tariffs on anything. I mean, typically Brazil is going to be much higher than that. So that's exactly the reason, William, why Brazil is not retaliating, because if you think about it, there is no reason at all to retaliate because, again, Brazil is super big in tariffs. So how can you, penalize the United States, right? Like now, the madness that you see going on, like in the Brazilian government, politicians or even newspapers, they're really, offended because President Trump is saying that the reason for the tariffs is not like economical, but it is political, right? So naturally, the government is being pretty quick in saying that the real reason is not like economical, and it is like the desire by the United States to direct the Brazilian politics, right? So it's like, we are the backyard of the United States. That's the type of, reasoning for people being mad. But yes, if you think from the tariffs perspective only, there is absolutely zero reason for Brazil to complain about anything at all. Brazil has been consistently applying huge tariffs, not only to, the United States, but, like probably every other nation in the world, right? So pretty interesting point, William. And Bill, hit the thumbs up button, like. I appreciate, Bill. Thank you for the reminder. Yes, when you like our live stream, first thing, you help our business. You help other people to find about our content. So yes, please do so. And I do appreciate the gesture. All of you, for sure. Jonathan, Luciano, can you give a suggestion or give a link for the visa to come to Brazil? Absolutely, Jonathan. Happy to do so. Let me do it now. E-Visa, Brazil. Because, it looks like the website is from VFS. And it looks fake to me. Like whenever I take a look at this site, I'm going to share with you guys. This is the website. Like it doesn't look like legitimate to me. Like it just looks like something non-official, right? But believe it or not, this one I'm showing to you, yes, this one is the legitimate application page. So I'm going to copy and paste. The link. And now you guys are going to know where to apply for the e-visa. By the way, we do offer this service to help you apply for the e-visa. We charge, very little. I think it's $125 with all the expenses we have. This is typically something that we lose money on, but we still offer because we think it's a nice way of getting people started with our service. And once they realize, we provide the good services, our hope is that they are going to come back for something more meaningful in the future, right? But for this one, typically we lose money every time that we help someone apply for the e-visa. But again, it's more like a loss, a strategic loss, because then you learn about our services and hire us for something more meaningful in the future. But here we go, copying the link and sharing here in our live stream. All right, here we go. All right, pasted. Okay, here we go. Gil Megasonic. All right, Gil Megasonic. Nice to meet you. Gil Megasonic is saying, hi, my wife from the United States can't fly here. We are married with Utah's online marriage. We will need a power of attorney to certify our marriage in Brazil. So Megasonic, typically if you marry in Utah, there are two, tracks for you to validate your marriage in Brazil. One track is for you to go through the consulate. I'm not sure if it is the San Francisco consulate in charge of Utah, so you could have the so-called transcription. The other option is for you to get an apostilled version of your Utah marriage certificate, and after those steps, you're going to have, you're going to have a recording done in Brazil. I don't recall if you need a power of attorney or not. We do that specific service on a daily basis, right? Like we do that for a lot of people. Typically, we do it like in Brasilia. In Brasilia, the first registry for we call natural persons, so is RCPN, Registro Civil de Pessoas Naturais, or natural persons. Civil registration, like that's the best translation I can come up with. But that's where we record. I cannot tell you, but I can tell you that the main steps are either an apostille in the United States or a transcription by the consulate, and then a subsequent recording in Brazil. All right, Megasonic. Okay, William, I'm actually really surprised that Brazil is cutting back on freedom of speech online. It seems completely unnecessary. From my experience, the Brazilians are open to different opinions. Having said that, there is a lot of mad stuff happening on social media, so it's a challenge that all countries are working with right now. I favor freedom of speech, but people have to use it responsibly. Yes, really, I agree. It's a huge challenge that nobody has an answer to, right? So I would say, people and countries, they are experimenting and see and try to see, what's gonna become like, a balanced version, right? Like, or a balanced approach to those things. I know that in Europe, like, you're also facing this dilemma, like, constantly, like in Europe, people are concerned with both freedom of speech and privacy and like avoid too much craziness in the internet. Not easy for sure, Reading. We have Sax Dragon. Hey, Luciano, I'm happy to see you. Same here, Dragon. I just wanted to say thanks again for working on my case. I have one more live stream with you before I am in Brazil. I'm so excited. Yes, Dragon. And I remember you promised you're going to drop by for some coffee, for some Brazilian coffee. And if I'm not wrong, and now it's more like a question, are you dropping by in São Paulo? Because we are moving to our new office in São Paulo, believe it or not, tomorrow, right? Like we've been in the process of moving within the same building, right? Like we have been in this building for several years now, and we are just moving like from one space to another. This new space, it was completely renovated, like, focusing on the current infrastructure that we have in São Paulo. So I think you're going to have a blast. And if you allows us, we're going to take a picture with you and put on our social media. All right, Dragon. But yes, we're waiting for you. Dragon, their website really does look so fake. Yeah, I mean, I think, if they wanted to to make a website looking fake, they couldn't get as close as they have with their website. I had to do some investigation to make sure there wasn't an e-visa scam. Exactly. That's exactly the point, Dragon. I don't know, like their website just looks, unreliable to say the least, right? Travel Jones, I recently applied for the e-visa. It was a simple process. I got in 3 days. There you go, Travel. Yes, very simple process. Unfortunately, it doesn't work for everyone. It's typically a hit or a miss. Okay, like for some people, if they have their names in some lists or if they had an issue in Brazil in the past, guess what? The e-visa is not going to work for them. If I had to guess, I would guess the e-visa is going to work for 70% of the applicants, but 30% are still going to need to handle the traditional visa at the consulate. And then, yes, it is a pretty big pain in the neck, right? Like, consulates, they are typically overworked. So, typically you don't get answers for your emails. Some consulates are even worse than others. One of the worst consulates nowadays. The Brazilian consulate in the US is the San Francisco one. They have absolutely no commitment to any level of customer service. You call them, and then guess what? There is pretty much an answer machine saying, you know what, send us an email. We're not going to take your call, believe it or not. And then you send an email, and guess what? You're not going to get an answer most of the time, right? Sometimes they can answer to your email, like at least in our clients' experience, like from what we see, they would answer whenever they feel like there is basically no standard whatsoever, right? So pretty aggravating, like I'm more like, venting my frustration over here. But yes, just like John said, like if it works, beautiful, you are gold. You can just come to Brazil using the e-visa. At the beginning, the e-visa would die off with your passport, and they have changed recently for the e-visa to survive your current passport, meaning that even if your current passport expires, the e-visa should still be good for the whole 10 years. So pretty sweet deal, I think, particularly given that you're paying like $80.90, right? All right. Travel Jones is sharing. The CPF, on the other hand, is something I'm struggling with. Yes, travel. And believe it or not, the CPF is also the hit or miss type of thing. If you try to apply in Brazil, it's more typically a miss. And one of the main reasons, which is very interesting to me, is typically that if you don't speak Portuguese, you go to a place in which they should issue the CPF, they are going to prefer to say that they don't, instead of saying that they don't know how to speak in English, right? That's one of the main reasons why you're going to have a miss when trying to apply for the CPF in Brazil. On the other hand, if you apply in the United States, it should be pretty straightforward since, yes, consulates, they are quick and happy to give you a tax ID. And, from the Brazilian government's perspective, it should be just like that because it means you're going to be paying taxes in Brazil, right? So why not give you a Brazilian tax ID? All right, so we have a couple of minutes left. I'm going to take a final participation here. But before we do that, I want to share with you our next live stream is going to be on Wednesday, right? So remember, if you still have a subject you would like to see discussed here live, you just come back on August the 13th. That's our traditional live streams on Wednesdays. On Wednesdays, we meet at 12:30 Rio de Janeiro time. And then our next Sunday live stream is not going to be on the 17th. We're going to skip the 17th. We're going to do it on the 24th. All right? So no live stream on, actually, I apologize. We're going to actually skip two Sundays, right? So today is August the 10th. The next one is going to be on August the 31st. And this is what we're going to do. We're going to try to keep our Wednesday live streams more consistent. And we're going to try to offer you a couple of live streams on Sunday. So this month of August is going to be on the 10th and on the 31st. All right, so now you know our schedule. You can also come to our YouTube channel, and when you click on the live section of our channel, you can also click on Notify Me. We have, the next live streams already scheduled over there. So all you need to do is, click on the Notify Me, so you receive a notification prior to us starting the live stream. All right. There you go. Let's take a final one. All right. Bill, Luciano, what's going on with this forged sugar cell contract using our logo? Yeah, so we have a pop-up, right? And Bill probably went to our website. Once you open our website, there is a pop-up mentioning that we don't broker commodities in Brazil. And the reason for doing so is because I think it was about a week ago, someone got in touch with our office and said, listen, can you confirm that you did sign this sugar contract and you were vouching for the contract, like we were basically brokering the deal between, buyer and seller. And when we took a look, it wasn't our signature, right? Like we don't broker commodities in Brazil. It's not a business that we provide. And we said, listen, what we need to do here is, of course, like to file a police report, which we did. We filed a police report. We created a page, basically explaining the dynamics of the scam. And we also added a pop-up. So as soon as people check our website, the pop-up is going to show up. And guess what? It's going to frustrate whoever is scamming other people, right, using our firm's name, right? So that was the whole ordeal. And we're going to keep, the pop-up working, and we're going to keep this page in our website. So our hope is that whenever people see our firm's name and they do something, like Oliveira Lawyers, a sugar contract, guess what? They are going to arrive at the page in which we denounce the scammers, and hopefully we're going to be doing our part to protect players in this segment. Thank you for sharing, Bill. Thank you, all of you, for participating in our live stream. Today it was a very busy, a very interesting live stream. Thank you for your participation. Thank you for your likes. And I see you again on Wednesday. And have a blessed rest of your Sunday.